Zekthar stood at the airlock door, watching the frozen surface of Europa stretch out below the transport ship. 3 months had passed since the Velan Empire agreed to fight alongside humanity against the Kresh swarm. 3 months since his people made what many considered a terrible mistake. The transport shuddered as it docked with the military base. Zekthar adjusted his armor and picked up his equipment pack. Around him, other Velan warriors prepared themselves. None of them spoke. They all knew what the others were thinking. Humans were weak, small, fragile. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore like paper. They died from things that would barely slow down a Velan soldier. The airlock opened. Cold air rushed in, and Zekthar stepped into the human base for the first time. A human male waited for them in the docking bay. He wore a dark blue uniform with silver bars on his shoulders. His face showed lines around the eyes and mouth. His hair was cut very short and showed gray at the sides. He smiled when he saw the Velan warriors, showing his small, flat teeth. "Welcome to Europa Station," the human said. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison. I'll be your commanding officer during joint operations." Zekthar studied him. Morrison was tall for a human, but still shorter than any Velan. His frame looked thin under the uniform. Zekthar had read the files. Humans needed sleep every single day. They could only survive in very specific temperatures. Their bodies couldn't heal major damage without machines and medicines. How could such beings hope to fight the Kresh? Morrison led them through the base. Human soldiers passed them in the corridors. They all stopped to stare at the Velan warriors. Some looked nervous. Others looked curious. A few smiled and nodded. Zekthar found their friendliness strange. In Velan culture, warriors acknowledged each other with respect, not casual greetings. The briefing room was large and cold. Screens covered the walls, showing maps and data. More humans waited inside. Morrison gestured to each one as he introduced them. "Lieutenant Amy Chen, Tactical Officer." A small human female with dark hair nodded. Her eyes were sharp and watchful. "Sergeant Chris Bradley, Special Forces." A muscular human male with scars on his face gave a brief wave. "Dr. Lisa Patterson, Xenobiologist." A human female with red hair and glasses smiled warmly. Zekthar and the other Velan warriors took seats that had been modified for their larger frames. The chairs still felt uncomfortable. Morrison activated the main screen. It showed a red cloud spreading across a map of the galaxy. "The Kresh swarm has taken 17 systems in the last 6 months. They're moving toward human colonies in the outer rim. We estimate 4 months before they reach our populated worlds." Zekthar had seen Kresh attacks before. The parasitic aliens moved like locusts, consuming everything. They had destroyed 2 Velan colonies before the Empire managed to push them back. But that had cost thousands of Velan lives. "Our strategy is aggressive defense," Amy Chen said, standing up. "We'll hit their supply lines here, here, and here." She pointed to locations on the map. "We'll force them to split their forces." One of the Velan warriors, Drakmor, made a rumbling sound. "That is suicide. You will be outnumbered 10 to 1 at each location." Amy Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Yes, that's the plan." The briefing continued for 2 hours. Zekthar listened as the humans outlined their strategy. It was bold. Some might say reckless. The humans planned to fight in ways that would result in massive casualties. They talked about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices, as if discussing the weather. After the briefing, Dr. Lisa Patterson approached Zekthar. "Would you mind if I conducted some medical scans? We want to make sure our equipment is compatible with Velan biology." Zekthar agreed and followed her to the medical bay. The room was bright and clean. Strange machines lined the walls. Patterson asked him to sit on an examination table while she ran various instruments over his body. "Fascinating," she said, studying the data. "Your bone density is incredible, and your healing factor is about 50 times faster than ours." She looked up at him. "You must think we're very fragile." Zekthar considered lying, but decided honesty was better. "Yes," Patterson laughed. It was a bright, genuine sound. "We are fragile, but we've learned to work around it." She tapped her data pad. "Did you know humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history? Over 10,000 years of constant conflict." "That is not something to be proud of," Zekthar said. "Maybe not," Patterson agreed, "but it's made us very good at it." Later, Zekthar went to the training facility. He wanted to see how humans prepared for combat. The gymnasium was large and filled with equipment. Dozens of human soldiers were exercising. Some lifted weights, others ran on machines. A group practiced hand-to-hand combat in a padded ring. Zekthar watched Chris Bradley work with a training dummy. The human moved fast, striking with precision, but his blows would barely hurt a Velan warrior. What use was speed without strength? A young human male approached Zekthar. He was breathing hard and covered in sweat. "Want to spar?" he asked, smiling. "I would hurt you," Zekthar said. "Probably," the human agreed, "but I'd learn something." This attitude confused Zekthar. Valens trained to win. Humans seemed to train expecting to lose but wanting to learn from it. What kind of warrior mindset was that? That evening, Zekthar stood in the observation deck, looking out at Jupiter's massive form. Commander Morrison joined him, carrying 2 cups of some steaming liquid. "Coffee?" Morrison offered. Zekthar accepted the cup. The liquid was bitter but warm. They stood in silence for a while. "You think we can't win?" Morrison said finally. It was not a question. "I think you are brave," Zekthar replied carefully. "But bravery does not stop Kresh Claws." Morrison nodded slowly. "You're right. Bravery isn't enough." He took a sip of his coffee. "But we don't just have bravery. We have something else." "What?" Morrison looked out at Jupiter. "We have something worth dying for. Every human on this base knows they probably won't survive this war. We've run the numbers. We've seen the projections." He turned to face Zekthar. "But behind us are our worlds, our families, our children. So we'll fight anyway." Zekthar didn't know what to say to that. The Velan Empire fought for honor and territory. They fought because it was their duty. But this human spoke of fighting out of love. It seemed like a weakness. "You should get some rest," Morrison said. "Tomorrow we start combined training exercises. You'll see how we fight." Zekthar returned to his quarters. The room was small but functional. He lay down on the bed and tried to sleep. But his mind kept returning to the humans he had met. They were weak in body. That was undeniable. But something in their eyes troubled him. A hardness. A determination that seemed out of place in such fragile beings. He thought of Amy Chen's smile when she talked about being outnumbered, of Dr. Patterson laughing about human fragility, of Chris Bradley's scars, of the young soldier wanting to spar despite knowing he would lose, of Morrison's words about fighting for something worth dying for. Zekthar had fought in many battles. He had seen warriors from a dozen species, strong warriors, tough warriors, warriors who could tear through steel with their bare hands. But he had never seen warriors who smiled when discussing their own probable deaths. For the first time since arriving, Zekthar felt something he didn't expect. Not contempt for human weakness, not pity for their fragility. Something else, something that made his combat instincts whisper warnings in the back of his mind. He didn't have a name for it yet, but it felt like the moment before a storm when the air grows heavy and still and every animal knows to seek shelter. It felt like standing on the edge of an abyss, looking down into darkness that looked back. Tomorrow he would train with the humans. Tomorrow he would see how they fought. Something told him that once he saw it, he would understand this feeling. He would understand why his instincts were screaming at him that these small, fragile, weak creatures might be the most dangerous things in the galaxy. The alarm woke Zekthar from deep sleep. Red lights flashed in his quarters. A human voice spoke through the speakers, calm but urgent. "All personnel to battle stations. Crash contact. This is not a drill." Zekthar grabbed his weapons and ran into the corridor. Human soldiers rushed past him, moving with practiced efficiency. No panic, no shouting. They simply moved where they needed to be. He reached the command center where Commander Morrison stood over a tactical display. The screen showed dozens of red dots appearing near Titan Station, Saturn's largest moon. The Kresh swarm had found them faster than expected. "How many ships?" Amy Chen asked from her station. 37 and counting," a human operator replied. "They're launching boarding pods." Morrison turned to the assembled warriors. "All Velen squads will reinforce Section C. Human squads will take Sections A and B. Move out." Zekthar followed his assigned unit leader, Sergeant Chris Bradley. The human moved quickly through the corridors, checking his weapon as he ran. 5 other humans followed him, along with Zekthar and 2 other Velen warriors. "Standard defense protocol," Bradley said as they ran. "We hold the main corridors. Fall back only if we're overwhelmed. Questions?" No one asked questions. They reached Section B just as the first explosion rocked the station. The Kresh had breached the outer hull. Zekthar took position behind a barrier. His weapon was charged and ready. Beside him, a young human soldier named Kevin gripped his rifle with white knuckles. The human was breathing fast, scared, as he should be. The first Kresh warrior came around the corner at full speed. It was huge, covered in black chitin armor, with 6 legs and razor-sharp claws. Zekthar fired. His plasma bolt took the creature in the chest. It fell, smoking. Then more came. 10, 20. A wave of black bodies rushing down the corridor. Zekthar fired again and again. Beside him, the humans opened fire with their ballistic weapons. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Kresh bodies fell, but more kept coming. "Fall back!" Bradley shouted. "Next position!" They retreated to a secondary barrier. The Kresh followed. Zekthar saw Kevin get hit by a Kresh claw. The strike tore through his armor and cut deep into his shoulder. The human screamed but kept firing. "Kevin's hit!" another soldier yelled. "He can still shoot," Bradley replied coldly. "Keep firing!" This was not how Velen warriors fought. A wounded soldier would be pulled back, treated, protected. But Kevin stayed in position, firing one-handed while blood ran down his arm. His face was pale, but his eyes were focused. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The Kresh kept coming. The humans kept firing. When their rifles ran out of ammunition, they switched to pistols. When those ran dry, they pulled out knives. Zekthar watched in horror as one human soldier, surrounded by 3 Kresh warriors, pulled out a grenade. "For Earth!" the soldier shouted, and detonated it. The explosion killed him and all 3 Kresh. "Did he just—" Zekthar started to say. "Eyes forward!" Bradley snapped. "More incoming!" A message came through their communications. Amy Chen's voice, strained but steady. "Medical bay is breached. Kresh in Section D. All available units respond." "Negative," Bradley replied. "We're holding Section B. Can't spare anyone. Copy that, Chen said. Then the channel went silent. Zekthar later learned what happened in Section D. Amy Chen had been coordinating defense from the medical bay when Kresh warriors broke through. The bay was full of wounded soldiers and civilians. Chen had grabbed a rifle and fought at the entrance, while Corporal Maria Santos, the medic, evacuated patients through the back. When the Kresh overwhelmed her position, Chen had retreated into the bay itself and sealed the door. Then she detonated explosives she had placed around the room. The blast killed her and 23 Kresh warriors. It also collapsed that entire section of the station. But it stopped the Kresh from reaching the wounded. Chen survived. Barely. They found her under rubble 3 hours later. Both legs broken. Burns over 40% of her body. Still conscious. Still holding her rifle. Back in Section B, the Kresh suddenly stopped coming. Zekthar stood among the bodies, breathing hard. His armor was scorched and dented. Around him, the humans checked their weapons and their wounded. Kevin sat against a wall, a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. He was eating something from a ration pack, chewing slowly. He saw Zekthar staring at him. "Want some?" Kevin offered, holding out the food. "You were injured," Zekthar said, confused. "Why are you not in medical?" Kevin shrugged with his good shoulder. "Medics are busy with the serious cases. This is just a scratch." Just a scratch. The wound would have sent a Velan warrior to the medical bay for treatment, but this human sat eating, ready to fight again if needed. Commander Morrison's voice came through the communications. "All units, status report." Squad leaders called in one by one. The numbers were terrible. Section A had lost 60% of their forces. Section C had held but suffered heavy casualties. The medical bay was destroyed. Power was failing in multiple sections. "Casualty count?" Morrison asked. 47 dead, someone reported. 93 wounded. Out of 300 humans on the station, nearly half were dead or wounded. Zekthar felt sick. This was a disaster. The humans would surely retreat now. They would call for evacuation, regroup, and plan a better defense. "Good work, everyone," Morrison said. "Rest period is 30 minutes. Then we start repairs and prepare for their next wave." Next wave? They were going to stay? Zekthar found Morrison in the command center. The human commander looked tired. There was blood on his uniform, though Zekthar wasn't sure if it was Morrison's or someone else's. "You must evacuate," Zekthar said. "You cannot hold the station with these casualties." Morrison looked at him with empty eyes. "If we evacuate, the Kresh use this station as a forward base. From here, they can reach 3 human colonies in 2 weeks. 7 million people. You will all die," Zekthar said. "Probably," Morrison agreed. He turned back to the tactical display. "But we'll make them pay for every meter of this station, and we'll buy time for those colonies to evacuate." He looked at Zekthar. "That's the job." Zekthar went to the medical bay, or what was left of it. Temporary shelters had been set up in an adjoining corridor. Wounded soldiers lay on cots and floors. Maria Santos moved among them, treating the worst cases first. Her uniform was covered in blood. Her hands never stopped moving. Zekthar saw Amy Chen on a cot. Both her legs were in metal braces. Bandages covered much of her body. She was awake, talking to another soldier. "Did we hold Section D?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the soldier replied. "The collapse stopped them." Chen nodded and closed her eyes. "Good." Then she opened them again. "When do we go back on duty?" The soldier looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, you need to rest." "That's not what I asked." Zekthar turned away. He didn't understand these humans. They joked while dying. They fought until their bodies broke. They sacrificed themselves for strangers they would never meet. It made no sense. He found Chris Bradley in the cafeteria. The sergeant sat alone, drinking something hot from a cup. His face was expressionless. "May I sit?" Zekthar asked. Bradley nodded. Zekthar sat across from him. "Your people fight well," Zekthar said, trying to find words. "But this is madness. You throw away lives for small gains." Bradley looked at him. "We don't throw away lives. We spend them." He took a sip from his cup. "There's a difference." "I do not understand." "My daughter is 6 years old," Bradley said quietly. "She lives on a colony 3 systems from here. If the creche get past this station, they reach her world in weeks." He set down his cup. "I'm not throwing away my life. I'm buying her a chance to live hers." Zekthar had no response to that. The 30-minute rest period ended. Alarms blared again. The creche were coming back for another assault. Zekthar picked up his weapon and moved to his position. Around him, wounded humans pulled themselves off medical cots and grabbed their rifles. Kevin was there, his shoulder bandaged, but his rifle ready. Morrison was there, coordinating defense. Santos was there, carrying medical supplies and a weapon. They were all there. Every human who could stand and hold a weapon was there. The creche came like a tide of black chitinous bodies. The humans met them with fire and steel, and bodies that refused to stop fighting. Zekthar fought beside them, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never experienced in battle. Fear. Not fear of the creche. He had fought them before and won. This was different. This was fear of what he was witnessing. Fear of understanding what humanity truly was. These beings who broke so easily, who died so quickly, who needed so much just to survive, fought like nothing he had ever seen. They fought like creatures who had forgotten they were supposed to be afraid. No, that was wrong. They knew fear. Zekthar saw it in their eyes. They were terrified, but they fought anyway. That was worse somehow. They felt fear and ignored it. They knew they would die and didn't care. The battle lasted 6 more hours. When it ended, the creche retreated. They left behind hundreds of their dead. The humans had held the station. But the cost was terrible. Of the 300 humans who started the battle, only 147 remained alive. Among the dead was Chris Bradley. He died holding a blast door closed while civilians evacuated behind him. He burned to death when plasma fire hit the door. Zekthar stood in the ruined command center looking at the casualty list. Nearly half the human forces gone in one day, and they called it a victory. Morrison stood beside him, staring at the same list. His face showed nothing. "I am sorry," Zekthar said. Morrison nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." He took a breath and straightened up. "But we held, and those colonies have time now." He looked at Zekthar. "That's the job." That night, Zekthar couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Chris Bradley's face, kept hearing his words about his daughter. The human had died buying time for someone he loved, and he had done it knowing exactly what it would cost. Zekthar finally understood the feeling he had on his first day at Europa Station. The warning his instincts had given him. It wasn't respect. It wasn't admiration. It was terror. Because any species that loved so deeply that they would burn themselves to ashes to protect what they loved, any species that felt fear but fought anyway, any species that saw death coming and smiled at it, was not a species to be underestimated. It was a species to be feared. 2 weeks after the Battle of Titan Station, Zekthar received orders to transfer to the warship UNS Defiance. The mission briefing was classified, but he heard rumors. They were going deep into creche territory, behind enemy lines. A suicide mission, most likely. The Defiance was larger than Zekthar expected. The human warship stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was scarred from previous battles. Weapons bristled from every surface. It looked like a ship designed by beings who expected to die, but wanted to take their enemies with them. Captain Ryan Foster met Zekthar in the docking bay. Foster was older than most human soldiers Zekthar had met. Gray hair, deep lines in his face, and tired eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome aboard," Foster said. "Your quarters are on Deck 7. We ship out in 6 hours." Zekthar's quarters were small but functional. He unpacked his equipment and tried to rest. Sleep did not come. His mind kept returning to Titan Station, to the human soldiers who fought until they died, to Chris Bradley burning behind the blast door, to Amy Chen detonating explosives with herself inside. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Lisa Patterson stood in the corridor holding a datapad. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. "I'm compiling research on cross-species combat psychology. I'd like to ask you some questions." Zekthar invited her in. Patterson sat down and pulled up files on her datapad. "You fought at Titan Station," she said. "What was your impression of human combat behavior?" Zekthar chose his words carefully. "Your people fight with great determination, but you take risks that seem unnecessary. You sacrifice yourselves too easily." Patterson nodded. "Let me show you something." She turned her datapad to face him. It displayed images of ancient human soldiers. "This is from a war 5,000 years ago, Bronze Age warriors, and this," she swiped to another image, "is from 2,000 years ago, Roman legions, and this is from our world wars, about 300 years ago." The images all showed the same thing: humans fighting, humans dying, humans in formations, in trenches, in burning cities. "We've been doing this a very long time," Patterson said quietly. "For our entire history, humans have been fighting wars, not just against aliens, against each other. We've had hundreds of major wars, thousands of small ones. We've killed millions of our own kind." "That is terrible," Zekthar said. "Yes," Patterson agreed. "But it taught us something. We learned how to fight. We learned how to organize. We learned how to push our bodies past their limits." She looked at him. "Do you know what a persistence predator is?" Zekthar shook his head. "On Earth, some animals hunt by chasing their prey until it dies of exhaustion. They're not faster or stronger. They just don't stop. Ever. They run for hours, sometimes days, until their prey collapses." She leaned forward. "That's what humans are. We're persistence predators. We don't have claws or armor or natural weapons, but we have something better. We don't stop." Zekthar thought about this. It explained much about what he had seen. "There's something else," Patterson continued. "Human brains are different from most species. We have very strong emotional responses. Love, hate, fear, joy, all of it is more intense for us. And we have this ability to override our survival instincts. We can choose to die. Other species can't do that. They fight or flee, but humans can look at death and walk toward it anyway. Why would evolution create such a trait?" Zekthar asked. Patterson smiled sadly. "Because sometimes the individual dying means the group survives. A mother protecting her children. A soldier holding the line. Throughout our evolution, the humans who were willing to sacrifice themselves kept their families and tribes alive, so that trait got passed on." She stood up. "Thank you for your time. I'll let you rest." After she left, Zekthar went to the ship's database and began researching human history. What he found disturbed him deeply. The humans had fought wars over territory, resources, religion, and ideas. They had developed weapons to kill each other more efficiently: chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They had built bombs powerful enough to end all life on their planet, and they had come very close to using them several times. but they had also developed rules for war, agreements about prisoners and civilians, medicine to save wounded enemies. They created laws to limit the horror they inflicted on each other. They fought brutally but tried to maintain some measure of humanity even in the worst circumstances. It was contradictory, confusing. These beings who could burn cities and kill millions would risk their lives to save a single enemy soldier. They created weapons of mass destruction, but also created art and music and poetry. They were capable of terrible cruelty and incredible compassion, sometimes within the same individual. The ship's alarm interrupted his research. "All personnel report to the briefing room." The briefing room was crowded. Human soldiers filled every seat. Zekathar saw Amy Chen there, walking with crutches. Her legs were still healing, but she had insisted on joining the mission. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the front with Captain Foster. "Listen up," Morrison began. "We're going after a Kresh hive station in the Sigma Quadrant. Intelligence indicates it's their main supply depot for this sector. If we destroy it, we cripple their advance." The tactical display showed the target. It was deep in Kresh-controlled space, surrounded by patrol ships and defensive platforms. "We're outnumbered about 30 to 1, Foster said calmly. "Our fleet is 12 ships. The Kresh have over 300 in that sector." A human soldier raised his hand. "What's the plan, sir?" Morrison smiled grimly. "We go in fast, hit them hard, and blow the station. Then we run like hell." "And if we can't run?" someone asked. "Then we make sure the station is destroyed anyway," Morrison replied. "We have backup plans for that, multiple backups." Zekathar listened to the detailed briefing. The humans had planned for every possibility, including the possibility that none of them would survive. One of their backup plans involved ramming the Defiance into the hive station at full speed. Another involved detonating the ship's reactor inside the station's core. These were plans that assumed total failure and total death. But the humans discussed them calmly, as if they were talking about weather patterns. After the briefing, Zekathar found Morrison on the observation deck. The human stood looking at the stars, drinking coffee as he always did. "May I speak freely?" Zekathar asked. "Of course." "Your plan assumes you will all die." Morrison nodded. "It's a possibility. We've planned for it. But you are going anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led Zekathar through the ship to a section Zekathar had not visited before. A large room filled with photographs and personal items. Hundreds of them. "This is our memorial wall," Morrison said. "Every person on this ship put something here. A picture of their family, something from their home, a reminder of what they're fighting for." Zekathar walked along the wall. He saw images of children laughing, families gathered together, beautiful landscapes, pets, lovers, friends. Each photograph represented someone waiting for these soldiers to come home. Morrison stopped in front of one photograph. It showed a woman with red hair holding a small boy. Both were smiling. "My wife and son," Morrison said softly. "They live on Earth. They're safe there. The Kresh will probably never reach Earth." He touched the photograph gently. "I could request transfer to a safer posting. I could probably even get a desk job on Earth if I wanted. Spend every night with them." "Why do you not?" "Because right now the Kresh are heading toward 17 human colonies. 4 million people total. They're not my family. I don't know any of them personally. But they're human. They're mine to protect." He looked at Zekathar. "If I don't fight here, who will? If everyone chose to stay safe, those 4 million people would die. Someone has to stand in the gap. Someone has to say this far and no further. You speak of duty, Zekthar said. No, Morrison replied. I speak of love. I love my wife and son more than anything in this universe, but I also love humanity. All of it. Every person on every world. And love means sacrifice. It means putting others first. It means doing hard things, because they need to be done. He walked to another photograph. This one showed a young woman in a medical uniform. That's Maria Santos's sister. She's a nurse on a colony world. Maria is fighting to protect her. He moved to the next. That's Kevin's mother. She's a teacher. Another photograph. That's Amy Chen's husband. He's an engineer on a mining station. Morrison turned to face Zekthar. Every person on this ship has someone they love, someone waiting for them. And they're all here, risking everything because they know other people have loved ones too. We're not fighting because we don't value our lives. We're fighting because we value all life. We're fighting so that mothers can watch their children grow up, so that lovers can grow old together, so that friends can share another meal. We fight because love is worth dying for. Zekthar had no response. The Valen Empire fought for territory and honor. They fought because it was their duty as warriors. But these humans fought for something deeper, something that made them simultaneously weaker and stronger than any species Zekthar had encountered. That evening, Zekthar heard something strange coming from the crew quarters. Music, loud, aggressive music with pounding rhythms and harsh vocals. He followed the sound to a common area where human soldiers had gathered. They were singing, shouting, really. The words were about war and death and fighting. The humans moved to the rhythm, some dancing, others just nodding their heads. Their faces showed fierce joy. Kevin saw Zekthar watching and waved him over. "War songs!" he shouted over the music. "It's tradition! We sing before battle." "Why?" Zekthar asked. Kevin grinned. "Gets the blood pumping, makes us remember we're alive." The music changed to something slower. The humans sang together, their voices blending. This song was different, sadder. It was about soldiers who died far from home, about sacrifice and loss. Some of the humans had tears on their faces as they sang, but they kept singing. Zekthar watched them and finally understood. These beings embraced all of it, the fear and the courage, the love and the violence, the joy and the sorrow. They felt everything intensely and used those feelings to push themselves beyond what should be possible. They were terrifying, not because they were strong, but because they were weak and fought anyway. Not because they didn't fear death, but because they feared it and faced it regardless. Not because they didn't love, but because they loved so deeply that they would burn themselves to ashes to protect what they loved. Zekthar returned to his quarters. In 6 hours, they would leave for the Kresh Hive station. Most of them would probably die there. The humans knew this. They accepted it. And they sang and laughed and looked at photographs of their loved ones and prepared to sacrifice everything for people they would never meet. For the first time in his life, Zekthar understood what true terror was. It was not facing a monster in battle. It was standing beside beings who had turned themselves into weapons powered by love. It was watching soft, fragile creatures who should have been prey become the most dangerous predators in the galaxy through sheer force of will. Tomorrow, they would go to war, and Zekthar would fight beside humanity. He prayed to his ancestors that he would be worthy of it. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sigma Quadrant. Through the view screen, Zekthar saw the Kresh Hive station hanging in space like a massive tumor. It was 3 times larger than any human station, covered in organic armor and bristling with weapons. Around it, Kresh ships moved in patrol patterns, hundreds of them. "All ships, battle formation," Captain Foster's voice came through the communications. Remember, our goal is the station. Ignore the small ships if you can. We need to get inside and hit the reactor core. The human fleet was pitifully small, 12 ships against hundreds. Zekthar watched the tactical display and calculated the odds. They were worse than he thought. The Kresh had at least 300 combat ships in the immediate area, with more likely on the way. All crew to battle stations, Foster announced. This is it. For humanity. For humanity, the crew responded as one. The fleet accelerated toward the Hive station. Within seconds, the Kresh responded. Ships broke from their patrols and turned toward the humans. Weapons fire lit up the darkness of space. The first human ship died within 2 minutes. The destroyer took concentrated fire from a dozen Kresh vessels and broke apart in a ball of fire. Zekthar watched pieces of the ship tumble through space. 200 humans gone in an instant. Keep formation, Foster ordered. His voice was steady. Stay on target. 2 more human ships fell. The fleet pressed on. Zekthar stood at a weapons station, firing at Kresh ships as they passed. Beside him, human crew members worked frantically at their controls. The ship shook as weapons fire hit the shields. Alarms blared constantly. The smell of burning electronics filled the air. Shields at 40%, someone reported. Reroute power from life support, Foster ordered. We only need to breathe for another 10 minutes. They pushed through the Kresh fleet like a spear through flesh. More human ships died. 5 gone, 6, 7. But the remaining ships reached the Hive station and began their assault on the outer defenses. All boarding teams, prepare for deployment, Commander Morrison's voice came through. We're going in. Zekthar joined the boarding party in the launch bay. 40 human soldiers stood in formation, checking their weapons and equipment. Amy Chen was there, her legs still in braces but her rifle ready. Maria Santos carried medical supplies along with her weapon. Morrison stood at the front, his face calm. You all know the mission, Morrison said. We get to the reactor core and plant the charges. We have 20 minutes from breach to detonation. That's barely enough time to get in and out. He paused. Some of us won't make it out. That's just the math. But the mission comes first. Understood? Understood, sir, the soldiers responded. The boarding pod launched. Zekthar felt the acceleration press him into his seat. Through the small window, he saw the Hive station growing larger. Weapons fire from the station hit their pod, but the armor held. Barely. They hit the station's hull hard. The impact shook Zekthar's bones. Cutting torches activated, burning through the organic metal. Then they were through, and the hatch opened. Kresh warriors were waiting. The boarding pod opened into chaos. Plasma fire and projectile weapons filled the corridor. Bodies fell on both sides. Zekthar fired his weapon, dropping Kresh after Kresh, but they kept coming. A human soldier next to him took a claw through the chest. The woman gasped, blood pouring from her mouth, and fell. Kevin grabbed her weapon and kept firing with both rifles. Move forward, Morrison shouted. Don't stop! They pushed into the station, fighting every meter. The Kresh fought back viciously, but the humans had something the Kresh didn't. The humans knew they were going to die anyway. It made them fearless. Zekthar saw a human soldier get surrounded by 5 Kresh. The man pulled out a grenade and detonated it, killing himself and all 5 enemies. His squad mates stepped over his body and kept advancing. No one stopped. No one hesitated. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters, weapons firing constantly, bodies piling up. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of blood. Zekthar's armor was scored with claw marks. His weapon was running low on charge. They reached a junction. 3 corridors branched off. Morrison quickly divided the group. Chen, take 10 soldiers and go left. Santos, 10 soldiers, go right. I'll take the center corridor to the reactor. Zekthar, you're with me. The groups split. Zekthar followed Morrison down the center corridor with 8 human soldiers. Behind them, he heard the sound of fighting as the other groups engaged Kresh forces. Explosions, screams, the sounds of dying. Morrison's group moved fast. They encountered Kresh patrols and cut through them. 2 human soldiers died in an ambush. Morrison didn't stop to recover the bodies. There was no time. They reached a massive chamber. The reactor core sat in the center, a pulsing mass of organic technology and strange energy. Around it, Kresh warriors formed a defensive line, at least 50 of them. "Plant the charges," Morrison ordered. "We'll hold them here." 3 soldiers ran toward the reactor while the others opened fire on the Kresh. The defensive line broke under the assault, but more Kresh poured into the chamber. They came from every entrance, a tide of black chitinous bodies. Zekthar fought beside Morrison. The human commander moved with practiced efficiency, firing his weapon until it overheated, then switching to his sidearm. When that ran dry, he pulled out a combat knife. A Kresh warrior got past Zekthar's defenses and slashed Morrison across the chest. The commander staggered but didn't fall. He stabbed the Kresh in its throat, then shot another one behind it. "Charges are set," one of the soldiers shouted. "Timer's running. 20 minutes. Fall back," Morrison ordered. They retreated, fighting every step. More human soldiers fell. 1, 2, 3. The Kresh kept coming. By the time they reached the corridor, only 5 humans remained. Morrison, Zekthar, Kevin, and 2 others. They ran through the corridors, the sounds of pursuit behind them. The station's alarms were wailing now. The Kresh knew what was happening. They were sending everything they had to stop the humans. They reached the junction where the groups had split. Amy Chen's team was there, or what was left of it. 3 soldiers, including Chen. Maria Santos's group wasn't there. "Santos?" Morrison asked. Chen shook her head. "Dead. Her whole team. They ran into a Kresh command unit." Morrison closed his eyes briefly. "Let's move." They headed for the extraction point. The boarding pod was gone, destroyed by Kresh fire. Their only escape was through the station to where the Defiance was docked on the outer hull. They fought through 3 more Kresh ambushes. Kevin died in the second one, taking 4 Kresh with him. One of the other soldiers died in the third. Now only 6 of them remained. They reached the docking area where the Defiance had attached, but the ship was under heavy fire. Captain Foster's voice came through Morrison's communicator, broken by static. "We can't hold position much longer. The Kresh are tearing us apart. You have 5 minutes before we have to detach." "Copy that," Morrison said. He looked at the distance to the ship, then at his remaining team. They were all wounded. Chen could barely walk. The docking tube was damaged and exposed to space in several places. "I'll stay and hold the door," Morrison said suddenly. "The rest of you go." "Sir, no," Chen protested. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Morrison looked at each of them. "Get to the ship. Tell them what we did here. That's all that matters." Zekthar grabbed Morrison's arm. "You will die." Morrison smiled. "Yeah, but you'll live, and you'll remember. That's enough." The Kresh were coming. Zekthar could hear them in the corridors behind them. Morrison positioned himself at the door leading to the docking tube. "Go!" he shouted. Chen and the other 2 soldiers moved into the tube. Zekthar hesitated. Morrison looked at him one last time. "Take care of them," Morrison said. Then he opened fire on the approaching Kresh. Zekthar ran. Behind him, he heard Morrison firing continuously, heard his voice shouting defiance, heard the explosions as the commander used his remaining grenades. The sounds of battle faded as Zekthar moved farther along the tube. They reached the Defiance. The ship was pulling away even as they boarded. Through the airlock, Zekthar saw the docking tube disconnect and fall away. Morrison was still back there, still fighting, still buying them seconds. The ship lurched as it accelerated away from the station. Zekthar made his way to the bridge. Captain Foster sat in his command chair, his face grim. The main view screen showed the Hive station receding in the distance. Around it, Kresh ships swarmed like angry insects. "All ships, maximum speed," Foster ordered. "Get clear of the blast radius." The fleet, what remained of it, fled into the darkness of space. Zekthar watched the timer count down. 15 seconds. 10. 5. The Hive station exploded. It was not a simple explosion. The charges Morrison's team had planted set off a chain reaction in the reactor core. The entire station tore itself apart in a cascade of energy. The blast wave spread out, catching dozens of Kresh ships and destroying them. Then it was over. The station was gone. The Kresh forces in the sector were crippled. The mission was complete. But the cost was terrible. Of the 12 ships that started the mission, only 3 remained: the Defiance and 2 smaller vessels. Of the 40 soldiers who boarded the station with Zekthar, only 4 survived. Chen, 2 soldiers, and Zekthar himself. Zekthar sat in the medical bay while doctors treated his wounds. Around him, the surviving crew moved quietly. There was no celebration, no cheering. They had won, but the victory tasted like ashes. He thought of Morrison standing at that door, buying them seconds with his life, of Maria Santos dying with her team in the depths of the station, of Kevin sacrificing himself in the corridors, of the 200 humans on the ships that were destroyed. They had completed the mission. They had struck a major blow against the Kresh. And they had paid for it with their blood and their lives. Amy Chen sat on a medical bed nearby, staring at nothing. Her legs were secured in new braces. She had multiple injuries, but she was alive. "Was it worth it?" Zekthar asked quietly. Chen looked at him. Her eyes were red but dry. "Ask me that in 100 years," she said. "Ask the children who grow up because the Kresh weren't able to advance through this sector. Ask the families on those colonies who lived because we bought them time." She lay back on the bed. Morrison would say yes. He'd say it was worth every drop of blood. Zekthar had no response. He thought of the memorial wall on the ship, all those photographs of loved ones. Morrison's wife and son would never see him again. Maria Santos's sister would grow old without her. Kevin's mother would bury her son. This was the human way. They loved deeply, and that love made them capable of terrible things. They saw the cost and paid it anyway. They walked into fire knowing they would burn, but accepting it because someone had to burn. Zekthar understood now. Understood the terror. Humans were not fearsome because they were strong. They were fearsome because they had learned to weaponize their weakness. Their fragility made them desperate. Their mortality made them fierce. Their capacity to love made them capable of any sacrifice. They were the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, not despite their weakness, but because of it. And Zekthar had fought beside them, had seen them die for people they would never meet, had watched them burn themselves to ashes to light the way for others. He would never forget it, never forget them, never forget the terror of fighting beside humanity. 6 months passed. 6 months of constant war. Zekthar fought in 12 more major battles alongside human forces. Each one followed the same pattern. The humans would plan an aggressive assault. The casualties would be terrible, but the mission would succeed. Always. The mission succeeded. The war was turning. The Kresh swarm, which had seemed unstoppable months ago, was being pushed back. Human tactics were spreading through the Alliance forces. Other species watched and learned. But none of them could quite match the human intensity. None of them could make the same sacrifices. Zekthar stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, now fully repaired and upgraded. Captain Foster had been promoted to Admiral after the Hive Station raid. Amy Chen now commanded the Defiance. She walked without crutches now, though she still limped slightly. "Zekthar," Chen called from the captain's chair, "the Valen High Command is requesting your presence for debriefing. They want a full report on human military capabilities." Zekthar had been expecting this. His people wanted to understand their human allies. Wanted to know if they could be trusted, if they were as dangerous as the report suggested. "I will prepare my report," Zekthar said. That evening, he sat in his quarters, trying to put his experiences into words his people would understand. How could he explain what he had witnessed? The Velan Empire understood honor and duty. They understood tactical advantage and strategic necessity. But how could he explain humans? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Lisa Patterson stood at his door holding a datapad. "May I come in?" she asked. Zekthar gestured her inside. Patterson sat down and handed him the datapad. "I thought you might find this interesting," she said. "It's my completed research on cross-species combat psychology. You helped with it, whether you knew it or not." Zekthar read through the document. Patterson had analyzed dozens of battles, comparing how different species fought. The conclusions were striking. Most species fought to win territory or resources. They calculated risks and withdrew when casualties became too high. They had clear lines they would not cross. Self-preservation was fundamental to their tactics. Humans were different. They fought for abstract concepts: freedom, justice, protection of the innocent. They would accept catastrophic casualties if the cause was important enough. They had no clear line they wouldn't cross. Self-sacrifice was fundamental to their tactics. "We're not normal," Patterson said quietly. "By galactic standards, we're insane. We feel too much, care too much. We can't just calculate odds and make rational decisions. We make emotional decisions and then rationalize them afterward." "Is this not a weakness?" Zekthar asked. "In some ways, yes," Patterson admitted. "We make terrible mistakes. We fight wars we shouldn't fight. We die for causes that aren't worth dying for." She paused. "But when we find something truly worth fighting for, when we find a cause that matters, we become unstoppable. Because we're not fighting to win. We're fighting because not fighting is unthinkable." She stood up to leave, then turned back. "Your people asked you to report on whether humans can be trusted. Here's my answer. We can be trusted to do exactly what we say we'll do. If we say we'll defend you, we'll die defending you. If we say we'll destroy our enemies, we'll burn ourselves to ashes to make it happen. We're predictable that way. The question isn't whether we can be trusted, it's whether you can accept what that trust costs." After she left, Zekthar returned to his report. He began writing. 2 days later, he received an unexpected message. A civilian transport had docked with the Defiance. It carried a single passenger who requested to meet with him. Zekthar went to the docking bay. A human female stood there, holding the hand of a small human child. The woman had red hair and tired eyes. The child was perhaps 7 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. "Are you Zekthar?" the woman asked. "Yes. I'm Kate Bradley. This is my daughter, Sophie." She put a hand on the child's shoulder. "Chris was my husband." Zekthar felt something twist in his chest. Chris Bradley, the sergeant who died at Titan Station, holding the blast door closed. The man who fought for his daughter's future. "I am honored to meet you," Zekthar said carefully. Kate smiled, though tears shone in her eyes. "Chris sent me messages during his last days. He talked about you, said you were a good warrior, a good person." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "This was Chris's, his unit medal. I thought you should have it." "I cannot accept this," Zekthar said. "I am not worthy." "You fought beside him. Kate said. You tried to protect him. That's enough. She pressed the box into his hands. Please. It would mean something to us. Zekthar opened the box. Inside was a metal disc on a ribbon. The metal showed a human warrior standing against a dark sky. Words were engraved below. For those who stand when others fall. Sophie stepped forward. Daddy said you're big and strong, she said in a small voice. Did you fight the monsters? Yes, Zekthar said. I fought beside your father. He was very brave. I know, Sophie said. Mommy says Daddy saved lots of people, that he's a hero. Your mother is correct, Zekthar said. He knelt down to the child's level. Your father was the bravest warrior I have ever known. He fought so that you could be safe, so that you could grow up in peace. Sophie looked at him with eyes too old for her face. Do you miss him? The question surprised Zekthar. Did he miss Chris Bradley? They had known each other for such a short time. But yes, he missed the human's quiet competence, his dry humor, the way he had fought without hesitation. Yes, Zekthar said, I miss him. Sophie hugged him suddenly, her small arms barely reaching around his armored torso. Thank you for being his friend, she whispered. Zekthar stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Then carefully he put one large hand on the child's back. This was what Chris had fought for. This small human child who wanted nothing more than to grow up safely. This was what Morrison and Maria Santos and Kevin and all the others had died for. Not glory, not conquest, not even victory. They died so that children could hug strangers and grow up in peace. Kate took Sophie's hand. We should go. I just wanted you to know that Chris's sacrifice mattered. That we remember. After they left, Zekthar stood in the docking bay for a long time, holding the metal box. He thought of all the human warriors he had seen die, thought of their faces and their last words. They had all fought for this, for families they would never see again, for children who would grow up without them, for a future they would not live to see. It was madness. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. The next day, Zekthar attended a ceremony in the ship's main hall. A new batch of human soldiers had completed their training and were being assigned to combat units. Admiral Foster stood at the front addressing them. You're joining this war at a critical moment, Foster said. We've pushed the Kresh back, but they're not defeated. Many of you will not survive the coming battles. That's not pessimism, that's reality. He paused. But you're not here because survival is guaranteed. You're here because some things are worth dying for, worth fighting for, worth bleeding for. The young soldiers stood at attention, their faces serious. Zekthar recognized that look now. They were afraid, but they had chosen to fight anyway. After the ceremony, Zekthar finalized his report to the Veylan High Command. He wrote about human tactics and human psychology, about their willingness to accept casualties, about their emotional decision-making, about their capacity for both terrible violence and incredible compassion. Then he wrote his conclusion, the part that his superiors needed to understand most. Humanity is the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they are strong, they are not. Not because they are fast or tough or hard to kill. They are none of these things. They are dangerous because they have weaponized love itself. A human warrior fights hardest when protecting something they love. They fight beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond the limits of their fragile bodies. They feel pain as intensely as any species, but they have learned to embrace it and continue fighting. They know fear, but they face it anyway. They understand death, but they choose to die for causes they believe in. Other species fight to survive. Humans fight to protect. There is a fundamental difference. Survival can be negotiated. Protection cannot. A being fighting to survive will withdraw when the cost is too high. A being fighting to protect will never stop until they win or until they die. The galaxy has never encountered a species like humanity. We have encountered stronger species, faster species, more technologically advanced species, but we have never encountered a species that combines intelligence, tool-making ability, persistence, and suicidal devotion to abstract ideals. My recommendation to the Valen High Command is this: never make an enemy of humanity. If you must negotiate with them, honor your agreements absolutely. If you fight beside them, be prepared for the cost. They will expect you to match their sacrifice. And if you ever find yourself opposed to humanity, kill them quickly. Because if you give them time to organize, time to prepare, time to remember what they're fighting for, you have already lost. A human who knows why they are fighting is the most dangerous thing in the universe. Zekthar sent the report and stood at the observation window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the war continued. Human soldiers were fighting and dying. More names would be added to memorial walls. More children would grow up without parents. More families would receive the news that their loved ones were not coming home. And humanity would continue, because that's what humans did. They endured. They persisted. They fought until they won, or until there was nothing left to fight with. They were the universe's ultimate persistence predators, applied to warfare itself. Amy Chen joined him at the window. Her limp was barely noticeable now. "Thinking about home?" she asked. "About the war," Zekthar replied. "About everything I have seen." "Having regrets?" Zekthar thought about that. About the terror he had experienced fighting beside humanity. About the nightmares he still had of battles past. About watching human warriors burn themselves to ashes for strangers. About Chris Bradley's daughter hugging him in the docking bay. "No," he said finally. "No regrets. I have been honored to fight beside your people." Chen smiled. "The honor is mutual. You've saved a lot of human lives, Zekthar. We don't forget that." A communication alert interrupted them. Intelligence reported that Kresh forces were beginning to avoid sectors with known human presence. The enemy was learning to fear humanity. They were spreading warnings through their hive mind communication. Warnings about the small, fragile beings who fought like demons and never retreated. "They're afraid of us," Chen said with satisfaction. As they should be, Zekthar thought. Any sane species would fear humanity, because humans had discovered something terrible and wonderful, that love could be transformed into a weapon. That the same emotion that made them write poetry and create art and raise children could also make them into perfect instruments of war. They loved too deeply to ever give up. They cared too much to ever retreat. They felt too intensely to ever accept defeat. And that combination made them unstoppable. Zekthar had fought beside them, had seen their weakness and their strength, had watched them die and understood why they died, had learned to respect them, to admire them, and yes, to fear them. Fighting beside humanity had shown him terror like never before. Not the terror of battle or death or pain, the terror of understanding that the universe had created a species capable of turning their greatest vulnerability into their greatest weapon. A species that could look at the inevitability of death and choose how to die. A species that could feel fear and love and pain more intensely than any other and use those feelings to push beyond every limit. He returned to his quarters and looked at Chris Bradley's medal. "For those who stand when others fall." That was humanity in 6 words. They stood. When others fell, when others retreated, when others accepted defeat, humans stood. And they kept standing until victory or death claimed them. Zekthar placed the medal carefully on his desk, where he could see it every day. A reminder, a warning, a memorial. He had learned the truth about humanity, and that truth would stay with him forever. Some things in the universe were meant to be feared. Humanity was one of them. Not because they were monsters, but because they had learned to become monsters when necessary, and then return to being compassionate beings who created beauty and raised children and built civilizations. They contained multitudes. They were contradictions made flesh. They were the universe's response to the question, what happens when you give a persistent predator intelligence, tools, and the capacity for love? The answer was simple and terrifying. You get humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same.